Welcome to Recombination Nation. Today's guest, Dmitry Orlov, was a critical voice during the early 2000s peak oil and global financial crisis um, extravaganza that was very influential in my life. And I'm hoping and guessing that a lot of you have listened and read to his extensive work comparing the collapse of the Soviet Union and what he expects could be a less favorable event when when the USA finally loses its position as kind of the global hegemon, which feels like it's getting closer by the day. So that's my brief overview of Dmitry Orlov. Do you want to tell us a bit about you? Perhaps introduce yourself for people who haven't heard of your work before.
Yes, well, I used to be just a a humble internet systems architect working in startups in Boston, and then around the end of the last century, I realized that the United States was going to follow the same path as the Soviet Union. Having observed the Soviet collapse, I could draw some comparisons between the state of preparedness of Soviet society versus American society to such an event. And I wrote about that rather extensively and presented my findings at conferences, etc. And people at first laughed, and then eventually they stopped laughing and started crying and started getting a little angry at me. Um, and then I decided that it was time to leave and went back to Russia. And I've been living in Russia happily ever since then,
Hmm.
um, being quite immune to the developments that are now unfolding in the United States. So I'm now watching the United States from afar and marveling at how correct I was about the lack of preparedness in the United States. I'm sorry that people are suffering in the United States, but on the other hand, they could have listened to me.
Mm. Do you think, how uniform do you think that lack of preparedness is? Like, there is a big prepper movement in the United States. How much of it is kind of cosplay, and how much of it is actually going to be useful?
Well, I published a book by a fellow by the name of Greg Jeffers a few years ago, quite a few years ago, it turns out. But he was, it's called Prosperous Homesteading. The book sold really well. He's a Quaker, um, and he settled next to the Amish and learned homesteading from the Amish, who were not going to uh, let him into their society, of course, because he's not Amish, but they were the best neighbors imaginable and shared all of their know-how with him. So he did really well, and he tried to extend his operation. People would come and want to learn and didn't do any work, or if they did the work, they got fed up with it pretty quickly.
Mm.
Most people couldn't deal with the fact that there was no internet and left. Um, and so he pretty much gave up. Uh, he decided that American society consists of people who aren't capable of embracing that lifestyle. That
Mm.
was his bottom line. So that's how prepared Americans are, as far as I can tell.
Interesting. Maybe the Amish will be the only coherent power left to pick up the pieces.
Oh well, there's the Amish, there are the Hutterites, there are the Mennonites, there are the Mormons. They're pretty far along in terms of how prepared one has to be.
Interesting. Interesting. Yes. Um, Now, while I am thinking about it, maybe this is a little bit too self-interested, but do you have any perspectives on Australia in that lens? Because I'm in Australia and I have major concerns about how our country is responding to the unfolding crisis. I think we're unusually vulnerable among the industrialized nations.
Oh, well, yes, Australia has been blessed with one of the more incompetent Western governments imaginable, who basically sold the country out to Wall Street quite a while ago.
Mm,
And so it is extremely vulnerable from all sorts of perspectives. And from that point of view, I really don't know what could be made of it in a
Mm.
positive sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if we're lucky, maybe a few camel herders will come over here and show us how to actually live on the continent that we've claimed.
Well, yes, it's not a very hospitable continent overall.
Mm. Mm.
It's a challenge in a lot of ways just to live there. I mean, for 80,000 years, it was inhabited by people who pretty much just used a digging stick to get the food that they needed.
Mm. Mm.
Didn't develop past that point very far. Um, and so I don't know what sort of humanity Australia could sustain in the long run.
Mm. It's a puzzle that I'm kind of working on, so you'll have to watch this space. But one thing I really want to talk to you about is the agricultural system in Russia. So how does it break down between the industrialized sector and informal systems?
Well, informal systems are there as a backstop in case things go seriously wrong, so that people don't starve. Right now, a lot of people have kitchen gardens and have hot houses. Just about every house has a hot house next to it.
Hmm.
It's used to grow cucumbers and bell peppers and tomatoes, which don't grow in Russia in open ground. Um, and lots of people use that just basically to have tasty food at the table on summer holidays and maybe conserve some for the winter, some pickles and things like that.
Mm.
But that is basically just a hobby, recreation, etc. Now, on the other hand, a lot of if you head out of the city far enough, lots of people grow their own potatoes, and that is very typical.
Mm.
And the amount of it depends on what kind of land it is, but there are some fairly extensive potato fields out there, and a lot of people have their own potatoes, which is a staple. So that's fairly important, and that is actually the only thing you can grow economically. That is, you save money by doing that.
Mm.
Strange as that may seem in Russia. Now, in terms of overall agriculture, you have to understand that Russia is a huge territory, so there's lots of land. But on the other hand, it's a territory for precarious agriculture. Not every year will yield a crop. The heating season is 8 months long in most places,
Mm.
and so the only way people could survive ever in Russia is by pooling resources. Individual homesteads don't stand a chance in Russia.
Mm.
They
Mm.
would all die within a couple of generations. And so communal agriculture is the only way to do it. Now communal is out of favor now, so it's corporate agriculture. And
Hmm.
so there are giant agribusinesses that farm huge tracts of land. And the other thing is that the growing season is short, and everything has to be planted and harvested in a huge hurry.
Mm.
And so all of these farms have to be mechanized to a point where for a couple of uh, maybe a month, a couple of weeks, 3 weeks or so in late spring, and then maybe a month or 3 weeks in early autumn, everybody works 24 hours in shifts,
Mm.
and uh, all of the tractors and everything has to be, and harvesters and combines, everything has to be absolutely ready for that occasion. It's all hands on deck for a very short period of time. And that's how Russia creates huge bumper crops and is now the one of the largest grain producers to the whole world. Um, so that's how Russia operates.
I'm curious, this just a historical question. Did that dynamic in the agricultural season uh, have an impact on the nature of the Russian people?
Yes, the whole idea is that when you have to, you work,
Mm.
and when you don't have to, you don't.
Mm.
And that is very much part of the mindset.
Having an on switch and an off switch for activity, and not just individually but collectively as well.
Yes, yes, absolutely. You have no choice but to contribute when called upon to do so.
Mm.
There's an ingrained sense of duty.
Mm. Oh, after the difficulties of the fall of the Soviet Union, have people retained a cultural memory of the value of growing their own food?
Oh yes, absolutely. There's a still a tradition of kitchen gardens that's going on,
Mm.
more as hobbies, more as growing the best possible potato or tomato and having something to brag about.
Mm. Mm. I guess, I mean, this would be my guess is that knowing how to grow the first 10% of your food is like more than half of the battle. Like from that point, it's just scaling and logistics and putting everything else off if you're in a desperate situation.
Well, yes, the Russians can survive if deprived of store bought food.
Mm.
They do tend to survive.
Mm. Now, I've seen accounts of Russian villages, rural villages, like many around the world, losing their population as young people migrate away to cities. What's your take on that story? And is there any sign of it reversing, at least in some more favorable regions?
Urbanization in Russia, in terms of people leaving the countryside and settling in cities, has stopped.
Mm,
That's probably the only bit of good news. And as far as that, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that people can now live in rural places and still be linked into the national economy, because even small villages now have delivery centers where you can order anything you need from the internet and it will arrive in your village.
mm, mm,
So the logistics problem has been solved in terms of supplying villages with everything they need. And the other thing is that the communications problem has been solved because the Russian government is now providing internet, which also means phone service, um, uh, and television to even the most remote places. Pretty much the entire territory of the Russian Federation will, at some point within the next decade, most probably, be provided with high-speed internet, which means that children don't have to put up with a bad village school. They can avail themselves of the best education available via the internet.
mm,
And there's a lot of homeschooling going on through um, through internet sites that um, provide for their schooling for the children. There are standardized tests that one has to show up for to at a regional center or something like that, but that is only at the end of the ninth grade, and then again at the end of the 11th grade if they decide to go through the last 2 years, instead of going through some training program.
While you're talking about that, oh, two points. I'll try and juggle them. Um, is that a kind of counterexample to the Amish strategy of keeping, the culture of the surrounding world away from their children as long as possible to like prevent them being seduced away from the moment they can understand language? Maybe it's another set point that they get so much into internet access that they don't see the need to like get on a train and go to the big city.
Well, I think that comparing the Russians to the Amish wouldn't be very productive.
Mm, mm,
The Russians are very worldly people.
mm,
They're very open to the outside world, to the outside influences, have been, and they, instead of limiting the access of the outside world to them, instead they absorb it and reprocess it.
mm.
That is their know-how, their special skill. So they absorb culture from around the world and turn it into their own very successfully, and have been doing that practically forever.
Mm, mm.
So there is no question of limiting access of the outside world. There's
Interesting.
no such discussion.
Is that partly a consequence of geopolitical reality? Like Russia is a vast open territory in the middle of the biggest landmass. Like you can't exactly stop the neighbors from coming to visit if they're in the mood. Whereas Japan, I think, had success like closing itself off to the rest of the world when it was in the mood.
Well, yes, I think that has to do with it. I think there was a conversation between I recall Putin talking to a little boy somewhere about the borders of Russia,
Mm.
and the question was, where do the borders of Russia stop? And the answer was, and the boy answered, they don't stop anywhere. And Putin said, that's right. Russia's borders do not stop anywhere.
Mm. Mm.
So
Just
that's the mindset, is, that there's what ours, what we have to defend, but that doesn't mean that we can't wander outside.
mm. Just as an aside, a moment I always remember is watching the Seven Up Around the World series, where they interviewed like quite young children from lots of different cultures about, ordinary topics. And the Russian children were in a class of their own in terms of their self-awareness and their worldliness, and just I was just astonished every time they opened their mouths.
Well, I'm not surprised. The kids here are quite precocious, I would say, and they do know a lot about the outside world because it's beaten into their heads. Geography is a very important subject,
Mm, mm,
and it's taught in a way that you actually have to memorize just about everything about the planet.
mm, mm. Now, moving on to some more political kind of topics, I wonder, is Russia the most independent slash self-contained slash sovereign state in the world? And I ask that as an Australian who feels like our country doesn't really belong to its people and hasn't for a long time, maybe never. But Russia seems to be at the other end of that spectrum. Are there any other countries that you think are in similar ranking to Russia in that regard, or is my estimation even correct?
Your estimation is correct, and Russia is absolutely unique. It's You have to understand that Russia has everything it needs,
Mm,
except tropical fruit, maybe. Even there, they are making strides in growing tropical fruit in hothouses. So uh, Russia is the only country in the world that is completely resource independent. The resources, such as uranium, for instance, that it does import, it does so, or lithium, it does so not out of need, but out of uh, uh, economic expedience, um, because it's cheaper to import than to produce locally, but
mm,
not because they lack the resources. Um, in terms of peak oil, for instance, doesn't apply to Russia. It just doesn't apply
hmm.
because Russia is only one third explored.
Interesting. Um, is this almost like what would you say? Like an unexpected benefit of the Soviet experiment and its wrapping up, that gave it an opportunity to kind of break free of the global industrial system that dominates the rest of the planet?
Well, it never had much of a chance to join the global system,
Mm,
which no longer exists, by the way, on its own terms. It
mm,
was always um, either something to be exploited or something to be excluded or something to be feared because it's too different.
mm,
Russia, in terms of its mindset, in terms of it should really be treated as a different civilization. Civilizationally, it's very different from the West. So when the West dominated the entire planet, and by the way, that time is now over.
mm,
During that time, Russia was the other. It was always the other. And now that the West is pretty much, you know, down on its knees, Russia is just Russia. And the
mm,
rest of the world sees it as a unique development. of a civilization being built in a place where most people can't even survive.
Mm.
And if you look at Western Europe, there's basically a line to be drawn in terms of um, uh, a temperature gradient. Once you pass a certain part of that temperature gradient, which roughly passes through Berlin, things start to change. And by the time you get to, say, Moscow, Westerners just don't survive. They can't. They don't have the mindset to survive in that climate. So that they either become Russian or they die.
Mm. It reminds me a little bit of the Bantu expansion into southern Africa, that they had summer rainfall tropical crops that their civilization was based on, and they reached the Orange River, and on the other side of that, it was a winter rainfall regime. Like they just, that's what saved the Khoisan people from being completely wiped out. They retreated to a geography where their competitor just couldn't survive, and it almost seems like a similar thing with Russia.
Well, not really, because Russia's survival depends on technology, whereas the Khoisan don't have any.
Hmm.
So that's where the comparison starts to fail.
Hmm.
But Russia is a civilization. The Khoisan are definitely
Oh
not a
yeah, yeah,
civilization.
yeah. It wasn't a direct comparison with the people, but it was about the inhospitable geography being an advantage.
Yeah, it's not even so much as an advantage. It's just basically a natural force that shapes society to a
Mm,
very large extent. It forces cooperation.
mm,
It forces communal labor. It it negates individualism
mm.
to a very large extent, and that has formed this extremely resilient civilization.
I'm guessing too that like from the British Empire to now the US, they rely so much on, I guess you call it gunboat diplomacy, that they like their warships turn up at short notice in your ports, and you basically have very little negotiating room unless you have a bigger navy to fight them off. But being continental, Russia has been all relatively immune to that pressure.
Well, Russia has had a hard time over the centuries absorbing new weapons technology, new military technology, because the West, England, and the United States has led in the development of technologies for killing people. And Russia had to steal, beg, borrow, etc., and sacrifice some of their autonomy for that sake. Um, and also in terms of industrialization, it didn't have the ability to make all of it by itself just because of the climate, pretty much, and not anything else. So it had to borrow Western developments or buy them, sometimes on credit, and that has complicated things for it in terms of development. But now it leads. Now there's very little that Russia can't produce by itself or get from China that it
Mm,
needs.
mm. I'm also curious your opinion on how central the Russian language is to this dynamic. Does a complex language function like a cultural immune system?
Well, I don't know that it's an immune system. It's definitely a barrier because Russian language is not very learnable. Very few people devote the 6 years of their life um, to mastering Russian. I know very few people who speak Russian not as a native language who cannot be picked out immediately.
Mm,
Um, I I know very few people, maybe one or two that I've ever met, who don't make grammatical mistakes while speaking Russian, who are
mm,
foreign born. So so it's a very difficult language. It's not a grammar that you can learn from a book. That's the problem. It's a grammar that you absorb as a child.
mm,
Um, because it's just too complicated. It's not something that is directly learnable in the way that most people would expect. So there's that. It's a barrier on the one hand. On the other hand, it is it is old. It's a 1,000-year old language um, that has many layers. It has absorbed cultural influences from all over the world, from all sorts of other languages. So it's a process of accretion of taking German or French or English or Tatar and all of those influences have just poured in and have been digested um, into this strange mosaic that is the Russian language, which also makes it rather hard to learn.
Mm,
Uh, but overall, it provides an operating system. I would say that the Russian language is what unites Russians.
mm,
It's extremely uniform over a huge area. So, for instance, you go to England, and northern England sounds very different from southern England, and for that reason, they don't necessarily get along that well.
mm.
Whereas in Russia, you can go to Vladivostok, and people sound exactly the same as they sound in, say, St. Petersburg, which is 10 time zones. Um,
How
and so, as an operating system, it does work.
how much of that is a Soviet era legacy, or does it have older roots?
Mm. The language reform is actually something that the communists can pat themselves on the back for. The
Mm,
spelling reform did a lot. The fact that very quickly they managed to turn a largely illiterate peasant population into a largely literate and educated city population. That it was a traumatic process, but it was almost miraculous in terms of the transformation that it affected. And the fact that Russia is the fourth largest economy in the world by purchasing power
mm.
today is the result of that.
Yeah, yeah. I almost wonder if like unlearning something is harder than learning it. Like starting from nothing with an education program, if it was played correctly, could actually be an advantage. Whereas you don't have all of these like local writing traditions that you have to push out of the way before you get something more standardized put in place.
Well, the problem with Russia specifically was that the old imperial Russian was really crafty in
Mm,
terms of the way it was written and in some ways the way it was spoken.
mm,
It had baggage from the previous 5 centuries or so of Russian statehood embedded in it, and the communists came along and just ditched all of that. They just
mm,
basically took it all and dumped it, and more or less started from scratch. But then um, they had to pull out individual pieces and put them back in.
mm.
So it was a sorting process, and that sorting process was rather successful, I would say.
Interesting.
So a modernized literary Russian evolved rather quickly.
Is the language, uh, how is the language changing in response to the internet and all of these other influences, kind of bombarding it?
Well, there's a whole lot of internet slang in
Mm,
Russian now, and everybody more or less deals with it, understands it, etc. There's a lot of stuff that comes in from English in terms of terminology that just isn't really worth translating because coming up with Russian words for it would be a waste of time because who knows whether that terminology will even apply 2 months from today.
yeah, 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 yeah.
It's
It's
all transient. So a lot of people speak Russian but use quite a bit of English vocabulary to deal with technology.
mm, mm. It's so fascinating. Anyway, now I also want to find out how conscious the people and or the authorities are about peak oil and its potential consequences. I guess you've already touched on the situation locally, but how aware people are of the issues challenging the systems outside of Russia?
Um, I don't think they care that much about it. I think Russians overall care about the fact that They have access to relatively affordable fuel, very cheap electricity, almost free natural gas. I think we make our own hot water, and we cook with natural gas. And for 3 people, our bill comes to $2 a month for natural gas,
Mm-hmm.
and that's typical. It's almost free, and the whole country is being quote unquote gasified. They're piping natural gas even to small towns and villages, and the law is that the government has to provide everything but the pipeline through your territory, through your plot of land to your house.
Mm.
So, for instance, my house stands 1 meter away from the boundary of my land. So I pay for 1 meter of piping, um, which seems like a really good deal, and is. So they don't have to pay much for heat. They like that. Uh, the Russians definitely, I think they underappreciate, uh, how good they have.
Mm.
They have it. As far as the rest of the world, they hear about it, but they don't really care. Um, there isn't a whole lot of interest in discussing these issues amongst the Russians.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of what they feel in about the huge amount of oil and natural gas that Russia exports. Well, they understand that um, supplying natural gas and oil to China makes sense, because China is a trading partner, and China supplies Russia with manufactured products that Russia couldn't be bothered to make itself. And it makes more sense, since the Chinese are so efficient at it, to use them for it. But in terms of selling oil or natural gas to Europe, I think a lot of Russians are scratching their heads and wondering why the hell we would ever want to do that,
Mm.
because these are not friendly countries. And maybe they'd behave a little better if they started freezing in the wintertime. So that thought has struck a lot of Russians. And the other thing is that um, Russia has a systemic trade surplus because of its energy exports. There's a system that's been built up where Russia uses energy exports to keep taxes on Russians low. So there's a 13% income tax, for instance, flat income tax, um, which is very low, because the federal budget is being subsidized through oil and gas sales. And that seems like a good deal. But then you look at the amount at the trade imbalance, and it turns out that Russia has stockpiled enough foreign reserves to pay for its imports for 3 years. So
Mm.
it could stop exports tomorrow and still have um, a hoard of foreign currency that would last it 3 years. So that seems rather extreme. And why would Russia want to do that? Why would Russia lend people money with which they buy Russia's resources, non-renewable resources? That really doesn't make that much sense.
Hmm. How significant are the growing rail connections across Eurasia? Just one little tidbit that popped up on my radar, that the train line between Tehran and China had its first train go through right before the hostilities escalated. It might just be a coincidence, but do you have any perspective on that and the potential for land-based trade?
Well, I think that this is the last dying gasp of maritime imperialism. Um, uh, the world is being carved up into domains uh, that are geographic and contiguous land masses. So uh, Eurasia is being integrated via landlines and via the northern passage, along the Russian coast, which is impenetrable to anyone except the Russians because of the ice. Um, and the rail links are going to be a replacement, and pipelines are going to be a replacement for maritime trade, which Britain used to control, and the Americans fancy that they can now control. It's the developments in the Strait of Hormuz show that's not no longer the case. But there's a lot of piracy that goes on the high seas these days. Um, there's this concept of a shadow fleet that the Europeans and the Americans suddenly evolved. Nobody can define what a shadow fleet is. There is no such legal term in existence. And yet they feel free to label any vessel they don't like as part of a shadow fleet and steal the cargo, arrest the crew, steal the cargo, impound the ship. So that makes maritime commerce too expensive. And so land nations, contiguous land nations such as Russia, such as Iran, China, much of Southeast Asia will use rail transport moving forward. They will bypass the entire maritime system. Of course, that means that the Americans no longer control international trade. They can sanction anyone they want, but that won't have any effect at all. And it means that Lloyd's of London and their friends no longer can make money by insuring maritime cargoes, so their business goes bye-bye. And that's the last vestige of the British Empire, by the way. And that is probably bad news for the city of London as well.
And yeah, I'm mindful of this this development and its implications for Australia, way off on the edge of the map and functionally deindustrialized as well in terms of our actual economy, but not in terms of our tastes and our consumption. We basically swap raw resources for finished goods, and yeah, everything happens via maritime trade.
Well, I think that Australia has made a gigantic blunder because instead of integrating itself regionally, it integrated itself globally. So if Australia ever decides to put its house in order, it would need to deglobalize, cut its connections to the UK and to the United States, just sever them, and make deals regionally with Southeast Asia.
My gut instinct is that Australia and Japan would probably be abandoned by the US at around about the same time, and we might find some degree of friendship in each other that wasn't possible before.
Quite possibly, except you have to keep in mind that Japan, South Korea are rather morbid economically and populationally.
Oh, we'll get along with them. We've got the same problem here, apart from the immigration. Um, Now, where did I want to move on to next? Oh, yes. So what is your perspective on how growing resource shortages in the West is influencing the dynamics of warfare? And is this a major driver in the shift towards drone-based warfare that we just literally can't afford to make missiles and tanks and warships like we used to?
I don't think that it has to do with resource shortages. I think it has to do with advancements in drone technology and in artificial intelligence, embedded artificial intelligence. I'm not talking about chat engines, but there are now chips with computer vision that can pick out targets and target them, and etc. And there are now networking technologies that allow swarms of drones to operate and share information. And the Russians are already using this technology. The Americans are threatening to produce, and the Europeans are threatening to produce technology of that sort. But right now, there are two main developments that took place. One is that old APCs and tanks, etc., and all of that stuff is now obsolete because it can be destroyed very cheaply. So a tank that costs $10 million can be destroyed using a drone that costs a few $100s. And that has happened. So for a while there in 2003, the Ukrainians, that was probably the last battle of that sort that took place. The Ukrainians tried to break through Russian lines using tank columns and got destroyed. And then they tried again and got destroyed. And then they tried again. They kept doing this all summer. It was just like the dumbest thing you can imagine. And until they were out of tanks. And so no more tanks. Tanks are pretty useless at this point. But now the development is all in electronics and control technology and software. What the Ukrainians and the Europeans are doing now is churning out huge numbers of drones, thousands of them, and launching them in the general direction of Russia, attempting to target mostly apartment buildings. That's the one thing that they seem to be good at this point, is hitting the side of an apartment building full of people. This does not lead to any sort of victory for them, but it makes Russians mad enough to actually work at this technology very, very hard. And so they launch, I think yesterday they launched something like 700 drones in the general direction of Russia that got shot down. And maybe one of them got through and hit the side of an apartment building and popped some windows, etc. And usually one or two people die as a result of an attack like that. And if you think about it, well, okay, you put together maybe 1,000 drones, 900 of them got shot down, or 999 of them got shot down. One got through, killed two people, wounded, injured maybe half a dozen. And the Russians got a little bit more mad at you. Now, none of that makes sense, you see, except as a technological duel. So the Russians are doing all sorts of interesting things, like now these Ukrainian drones, they launch them, and the Russians do something or other to make them lose their mind. So they're showing up in Poland, in the Baltics, in Turkey. They'll be pretty much fanning out all over Europe and hitting the sides of apartment buildings. I wonder what sort of an effect that will have on the Europeans. Nothing else seems to work. So that's the development. You know, it's not resources. It's technology, and the technology is advancing very fast, and it's advancing mostly in terms of software.
My personal concern is that drones can be very small, but the kinetic payloads that they're currently carrying in terms of explosives are quite heavy. But we've had for a long time biological and chemical agents that are extremely lethal on a per gram basis, but they never had a delivery mechanism. You couldn't just spray them over the landscape and hope that somebody wandered into a cloud of it. But the combination of small drones with these chemical or biological agents with some form of autonomous AI that allows them to act relatively independently in the field could be unleash horrors, basically, that make the First World War look like less of a surprise for the people that blundered into it.
Well, the problem with those weapons is that they're basically terrorist weapons, and the biological ones can't even be targeted. It's also not true that the technology for spreading them didn't exist. the Russians back in the 60s had a rocket for planting crops. It was a rocket that flew along and spread seeds.
Ah,
So technology like that has existed for a long time. It's just that there's no use for it. It doesn't really. You see, the military doesn't operate on the basis of, oh, let's cause a lot of damage. The only place where that sort of mindset sort of operates is as far as nuclear deterrence.
mm,
But but tactical nuclear weapons are kind of useless. Nobody wants to use them at all. And same with chemical and biological weapons.
mm,
They cause more damage to you psychologically than they cause to the enemy in a lot of cases.
mm. Yeah, you have to have very good media to deal with the fallout. I mean, the US response after the nuking of Japan is a very complex and interesting story with a lot of different perspectives on how they've dealt with that.
Well, I think that the biological weapons are sort of God's wrath more than what people try to do. So, for instance, there's a hantavirus epidemic among the Ukrainian soldiers now because
Ah,
they've been living in trenches infested with rats, and
mm,
rats spread hantavirus. And so now the attrition rate among the Ukrainian soldiers um, in Sumy region in the north of the Ukraine is some people say it's going to be equaling the actual casualties of war.
mm,
So
mm.
and there's no treatment for hantavirus.
That's one thing I always find shocking is that more people died of the Spanish influenza after World War One in 6 months than in the entire uh, conflict of the 4 years of World War One.
Well, yes, except influenza is spread by coughing and sneezing. Hantavirus needs
Yeah,
rats.
yeah,
You
yeah.
need
But
you need rodents.
yeah, but just the scale of the impact of a significant epidemic, and like the Spanish influenza epidemic wasn't a big one by historic standards. I mean, that's one thing I should ask you. Do you think deteriorating high-tech health systems, sanitation systems, food in the West could be setting up conditions for a major infectious disease epidemic as our complicated systems kind of lose their capacity?
Well, that usually helps people die quickly.
Mm,
The lack of access to medicine, especially if it's an elderly population in a lot of Western countries. For instance, if you look at Italy, for instance, the reason coronavirus killed so many people in Italy is because so many people in Italy are old.
mm,
It's just a function of old age that people become more susceptible.
mm,
And that will happen in lots of countries with largely elderly populations, such as Japan, for instance.
mm. Yeah, it could be like a little mini Black Death in terms of the cultural and economic impact of suddenly chopping off the top of the demographic pyramid.
Yes, and for a while there, it would have a great positive effect on the economy.
Mm, mm. Don't speak too loudly, or our evil overlords will get ideas.
Oh, they know about it. That's part of the spreadsheets that they use, I'm sure.
Mm, mm. Now let's do a little bit of a retrospective on the early 2000s peak oil movement that it changed the direction of my life. Do you think there are any lessons about what it got wrong, right and wrong, that can be applied to the unfolding oil shock? I don't think we're still kind of deer in the headlights here in the West, waiting for the impact to really hit.
Well, the first lesson is that none of the models that we had and have are worth anything.
Mm,
Nobody knows exactly what's going to happen. So the models for oil resource depletion are just as bad as the climate models. And the climatologists turn of the century were saying that right now temperatures would be up by 5 degrees
Mm,
globally
mm,
on average. Are they?
mm. Indeed, indeed, yes. And I noticed at the time the most dramatic predictions were the ones that like sucked most of the oxygen out of the room, and you'd have parties like John Michael Greer saying, "Oh, it's probably going to be a long, slow, drawn out process," who mostly got ignored because it wasn't exciting for people who were tuning in for the latest news about the disaster.
Well, the whole predicting the future business is kind of a joke, I
Mm,
find.
mm,
Um, and people still want to know. Um, Especially money people want to know. They they want a prediction out of you, and telling them that what they're looking for, the information they're looking for, doesn't exist, doesn't please them. And so they go and listen to somebody who will provide this information for them,
mm,
such as Donald Trump. The money people love Donald Trump because he says one thing in the morning and another thing in the evening, and you can gamble on it
mm, mm,
and maybe hope to make some money. So the prediction thing is just stupid. You
mm,
know, all of the models that were modeling how much oil you could get out of the ground. Well, fracking got rid of that. Horizontal drilling, tertiary recovery, secondary recovery, all of that.
mm,
People were talking about, oh, the water cuts in Saudi Arabia are so high. Well, that problem got pretty much solved for the time being. Nobody hears about it anymore.
mm.
They just built more water separation plants. Big deal. Um, in terms of forecasting, say, how much oil Russia has, there are these people who will tell you, oh, Russia is running out of oil. They won't be able to keep exporting so much oil. Well, maybe they will be able to, but they won't because they won't have to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's one thing, and another thing is that Russia sits on top of the largest resource of shale oil in the world. It's called Bajanovskaya Svita. It goes from the Arctic Ocean to Kazakhstan.
Oh, geez. Oh, when you crack that open.
Well, it's hard to exploit, but again, that's a technological challenge.
Mm,
And considering that the Russians invented fracking technology, it's not a good bet that they won't be able to once the time comes. But on the other hand, the Russians are building lots of nuclear power plants,
mm.
and so they may not rely on oil that much in the future.
Well, one little thing I remember is reading lots of articles about the strategic vulnerability of the Strait of Hormuz and all of these wargaming scenarios if it all goes up. And that was like 20 years ago. And now that it's actually happening, I think the only benefit of like doing all of that reading in the past is I just kind of shrug and go back into the garden and like work on doing something meaningful for the day rather than getting hypnotized by the latest, breathless pronunciations on the news.
Well, what it means is that the world is going to be very different as a result of all this.
Mm,
I think it means starvation for all of the Green Revolution babies.
mm,
Green Revolution was basically the use of fertilizer, chemical fertilizer, nitrogen,
mm.
introduced into the soil artificially. And as a result of that, birth rates in many parts of the development world were much higher than they otherwise would be. And now that that fertilizer is not going to be available, what's going to happen to all of these green revolution babies? Well, starvation, really.
Mm.
And so we're looking forward to that. Um, it may be that the situation in the Strait of Hormuz is solved, but then there will be this missing harvest.
Mm.
And a lot of people will suffer from very high food prices around the world. And what that means is a lot of governments will fail. Um, if you recall, the Arab Spring
Mm.
was caused by a bad wheat harvest in Russia, and the knock-on effect from that, exploited by Americans, was to get rid of a whole slew of Arab governments
Mm.
in North Africa.
Mm.
And so this is going to be that times 10 or times 100.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that. So the vulnerability is more in the political and financial level of the system, I think is what you're saying, at least in the short term.
Expensive food.
Mm.
That's going to be the Achilles heel of a great many countries, maybe even certain ones in Western Europe.
Mm. Mm. Now, where did I want to go next with this? Oh, I'm curious just in general how the internet functions differently in Russia. Is it both culturally and technologically? Is it a different kind of system than what we're used to in the West?
Well, Russia has per capita probably the largest number of internet users in the world, or at least it used to. I think China is coming right along. But Russia is used to kind of having the internet as a completely wild, unregulated place. And the government has been trying to regulate it to some extent because it's being used rather successfully by all kinds of criminals. So Russia has been struggling to limit the criminal economy and also the inroads of foreign intelligence services. Um, Not so much spying, but manipulating the media space of Russia,
Mm.
infiltration, etc. And so a lot of what the Russian government has been doing has been a little bit ham-handed. Some of it is too little, too late. On the other hand, these foreign special services have been investing quite a bit of money in bad-mouthing the Russian government's efforts to regulate the internet. But what I think will happen eventually is that Russia will build a serviceable firewall, just like China did,
Mm.
where people who have to go outside the firewall for whatever reason can do so. But for most people, everything they need is inside that national firewall.
Mm. Interesting. Does Russia have any strategic vulnerabilities with microprocessors coming from Taiwan, for example, which is so specialized in like the highest end chips?
I think so. I think that there are a lot of servers that could be compromised because they have various types of backdoors in them that were put in there by request from the CIA. I just don't know enough about it. In
Mm.
terms of military, the military does not use any imported parts.
Okay, okay. Yeah, it's a big question mark I have over the internet and beyond that AI, that it's built on a very fragile and complex and bottlenecked ecosystem that could be disrupted in the short term quite dramatically by any number of random events. And in the long term, I wonder how sustainable it is that we can keep the internet going. And I don't know, I wonder if governments and authorities become dependent on the internet to maintain order. If it suddenly goes away, that could leave them in a very difficult situation.
Well, Russia has been experimenting with that. So, for instance, there's a white list of services that people need um, uh, to to communicate with the government, communicate with emergency services, communicate with each other. Those will work no matter what, and
Mm.
then everything else can be shut off. And that everything else includes services that drones might use for targeting.
Mm.
So that has been quite successful. That actually does work. And so there are ways of limiting the internet to just what's needed, and those are being worked out. Uh,
Mm,
not all the bugs have been worked out yet, but there is hope that they can get it to work right.
mm. Uh, Now, do you have any thoughts on my concerns that in the West, digital infrastructure has been put in place that could pave the way to a kind of techno-authoritarianism in the near future, if particularly if governments feel, pressed kind of Arab Spring style to maintain control, that there's an infrastructure there that could be used in a much more heavy-handed way against populations in the West?
Well, that's already happened. I mean, how many people are in jail for um, social media posts in the UK right
Mm,
now?
mm,
Uh, Europe is already, the EU is already a totalitarian state. And what it uses to keep control is the internet.
mm.
So that has already happened. That horse is out of the barn, I would say.
It's very interesting because in the West, our perception of China's social credit score is, oh, that's so creepy, that's dystopian, we'd never do that here. But then you look at what is already happening, and it's like, it's not that different in practice.
Well, the Chinese may be dystopian in the sense that their social controls are effective. If that's dystopian for you, then it's dystopia.
Mm,
Whereas Western social controls are more about dysfunction than dystopia.
mm.
So pick whichever you like. Do you like dystopia or do you like dysfunction?
Mm, mm. I mean, I even have moments of sympathy with the devil. Like if it's a choice between complete system breakdown and authoritarianism, a lot of people, if they really see what the consequences of the breakdown could be, may be inclined to say, where's the boot? I'll take it.
Well, the funny thing is that, crime rates in Europe are really, really high compared to Russia.
Mm,
And surveillance is at about the same level. It's just that in Europe it doesn't work.
mm,
In Russia, I have a niece who can walk home at night without fear through the center of a city of 5 million people
mm,
because it's safe, because crime has been pretty much dealt with, because criminals know better than to try to do anything in public. They're all on the internet.
mm, mm. Um, do you have any thoughts about how culture, language, and communication technology might evolve through the collapse of industrial civilization, or at least its severe degradation in the West? Like, will even novels survive in the long run?
Well, what's happened is that literate culture based on books has pretty much gone away. If you look at what the young people are doing,
Mm,
some of them still read, but what they read is fantasy novels. Uh, in terms of serious literature, there really isn't much of it.
mm,
It has pretty much gone away. Um, in the publishing business is all driven by pulp, and I don't know how much of it can be salvaged. Um, Books are just going away. So to some extent, that is being mitigated by the fact that you know I can um, I can get any text up on my computer. I don't have to carry books around because anywhere where there's an internet connection, I can get any book I want. So if I want to read something with my son or have him read something, I can just get it to pop up on the screen. But what happens if that no longer works?
mm.
Well, then it's just bye bye. Then people become very stupid very quickly.
Like, I think of the estimated, what, 95% of texts from the Roman era that were lost during the fall, like little fragments and occasionally uh, things that people cared enough about to hang on to them when the systems for producing, those objects went away. But yeah, it makes you really wonder about how much of the digital content that could be lost. But then again, how much of it is actually worth preserving? Maybe it's only a small percentage of it.
I think it is a rather small percentage. I think that if you get the really valuable works of literature together, that will be a rather large shelf.
Mm, mm. Yeah, yeah, it could be a relief to delete the internet and start over more thoughtfully.
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of garbage out there.
Mm, mm. Um, Now, I think that's everything I wanted to ask you. I have a couple of fun open-ended questions that I ask everyone. The core theme of this podcast and my work is that biology and culture are these potent well springs of innovation. So I always ask people if you could wave a magic wand and create a new life form, what would you wish into existence?
I really don't know. Um,
Well, you mentioned
what would I?
tropical fruit. Are there plants that you wish could handle the Russian winters, which currently don't?
I think if I wanted to produce an intelligent life form, I would make cats more intelligent.
Hmm. Hmm.
That would be my choice. Intelligent, like a cat you could talk to. That would be
Interesting.
cool.
Yeah, yeah, I like that one. I like that one. And the sister question to that is if you could create a new cultural technology, a tradition or an institution, or maybe something else I haven't thought of, what would you create?
Um, I don't think I would even want to think about that, really. I think that, I would not be the prime mover in that space.
Mhm.
I would just, I'm the sort of person who sits back and watches things develop. I
Mhm.
wouldn't intervene.
I did have one question that popped to mind that I'd been thinking about asking you, and I'm very glad that it came back. Um, we're talking across the different sides of a major conflict between, various geopolitical parties that are stomping around the planet. And what potential do you see for this kind of technology, this digital communication technology, to lead to more cultural understanding and perhaps change the course of those kind of conflicts? Like, could they be made impossible if the people in the West were more aware of, the approaching uh, difficulties that were starting to build up in Ukraine many years before the war began? Like, it's being able to talk to people from the other side, a kind of superpower of the internet that isn't being used to its full percent potential.
Well, you have to understand that about 80% of all the media that people consume is controlled by a handful of corporations.
Mm,
And they all have members of their boards sit on it. Basically, they have the, the owners of the major stockholders sit on each other's boards. So it's all very inbred and controlled very much from the top. And that is Western media. In terms of regional media, um, well, Russia and China have their own, but they're illegible to people in the West
mm,
and is blocked. So, for instance, you used to be able to watch RT
mm,
in Europe. They eliminated it. So, people in the West are pretty much victims of mushroom theory. Keep them in the dark and feed them excrement.
mm,
Um, and there's nothing to be done about it. In terms of being able to influence things, voting, as far as I can tell, none of the European countries are anywhere near democratic. There's some kind of an opaque party mechanism and coalition building and blah blah blah, and none of it. And what it means is that the way you vote has nothing to do with what happens,
mm,
essentially. Um, in terms of being able to influence things directly, you need a great deal of money, and then we're talking about 1% of the population, which is more interested in money
Mm,
than actually getting anything accomplished, other than getting even more money. So that's a self-limiting thing. So I'm not very hopeful about any of it. I think that basically things that are destined to fall apart um, should be pushed, and if you can push them, you should.
mm,
That is a good thing to do. It's good for the soul. But in terms of fixing things or avoiding problems, etc., I don't see how regular normal people can get any of that done.
mm. Well, I would definitely report there's a growing sense among young people in the West that the media is untrustworthy, voting is ineffectual, and yeah, it's basically we're on track for a kind of collapse, and basically bring it on. I think the joke is like just send the meteor to hit us already and get it over and done with.
Well, I think it's going to be more painful than just a media,
Mm,
but there's already upheaval. If you watch what's happening in London or in Berlin, places like that, even Brussels, people are beginning to realize that their governments are basically going to watch them suffer,
mm,
and they don't fancy going through that process. So I think that there are a lot of governments in the West that really they they think that this can keep going, but it can't.
mm. Yeah, it's fascinating times watching this all unfold, and I really appreciate the opportunity to get outside perspectives on this. So, yes, thank you very much for taking the time to talk. Where can people find more of your work? Where would you like them to go uh, to read more of your stuff, listen to more of your material?
I use a blogging platform called Boosty. It's actually a Dutch company, but it has mostly Russian content on it. It's boosty.to, and my blog on there is /club Orlov, CLUBORLOV. So if you go to boosty.to /club Orlov,
Hmm.
there will be my blog there. It's by subscription, so that I keep the riffraff out and the quality of the content high. There are lots of good comments by contributors,
Mm.
um, and I hope to see you there.
Excellent, excellent. I will note too, I found your YouTube channel where you've got short videos with your cat, which are charming and informative, and also a great place to start.
Yes, I should probably mention YouTube. I don't. I try not to do YouTube too much, but I may need to, just to draw a little bit more of attention to myself,
Hmm.
just to let people know that I exist, because a lot of people don't know that my blog even exists.
Mm, I've read you historically, and I lost track of your work when you shifted to a new platform. So I'm very glad that I found you again.
Well, great.
Mm. And I'll put links to all of that in the show notes, so it's easy for people to follow up.
All right. Well, thank
Okay.
you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Dmitry. You can sign up for my Substack for free and get a weekly reminder in your inbox of my latest article about my experimental farm, book reviews, and choice long form content from the internet. Next week, I talk to Todd Elliott, the cunning farmer, about the history and the future of agricultural magic.